And many of you were not at the last class, so I'd like to summarize a little bit of what we discussed. The questions that were being asked by Brajanath were regarding Sangha, and especially regarding how someone becomes fortunate enough to become a devotee. And although the verse wasn't quoted, there's a verse in Chaitanya Charitamrita, many of you know. And the verse goes, Guru Krishna Kripaya Paya Bhakti Lata Bij. By the mercy of Guru and Krishna, you get the Bhakti Lata Bij. And in that verse, the word Bhagyavan is used. And Bhagyavan means someone who's fortunate. So the verse says, after Brahmanda Brahmite Kona Bhagyavan Jiva. After wandering through lifetimes in the material universe, if someone is a Bhagyavan, fortunate soul, then he gets the mercy of Guru and Krishna, and he gets the Bhakti Lata Bija. So the natural question comes up, well, how do you become fortunate? Or how did I become fortunate? How did you become fortunate? And why is it my next door neighbor is not interested in Krishna consciousness? Why is it that my cousin is not? Why be my mother is not? Why are some people even married to people that are not interested in Krishna consciousness? It's quite interesting if you think about it, because maybe you're married to someone before you were a devotee, or maybe even after you were a devotee, but they're not that interested in Krishna consciousness. You would think, well, after all the association they get because you're a devotee, you would think they would become more interested. And so naturally, the question arises, well, what makes somebody interested? Because someone may be around Krishna consciousness and just not be that interested. And somebody else, they get around it, and immediately they take to it. So, what this verse said is that by engaging in activities of devotional service, even unknowingly, perhaps even unwillingly, one begins to accumulate what is called bhakti sukriti, or devotional piety. And if you think of it like a bank account, when it reaches a certain balance, then one starts to become attracted to devotional service. One starts to become attracted enough to want to be around devotees more and then take up the process. So we related a story that Prabhupada was walking in maybe Regent's Park in London, one of those parks. And there were a lot of hippies lying on the bench. And Prabhupada was saying, by good fortune, they can become devotees. So all these people can become devotees by good fortune. So one of the devotees relates that he was on that walk and he was thinking, what is this good fortune? What does Prabhupada mean by good fortune? Because basically Prabhupada's saying, well, anybody can become a devotee by good fortune, if they get good fortune. What is this good fortune? What does that mean? So the devotee asked Prabhupada, he said, what is this good fortune? How do they get good fortune? What it's all about? And Prabhupada said, we are their good fortune. So what did Prabhupada mean? Well, the same point I just explained is what he meant. He said, we engage them in Krishna consciousness. And because of engaging in spiritual activities, again, the same point, it hits a certain bank balance, and then they develop a strong desire to engage in Krishna consciousness. So by engaging, we or a devotee is the one who engages them in Krishna consciousness. Gaur Govinda Maharaj, who was a Vaishnava from birth and met Prabhupada around 1972 or 73, has written a book, I believe, called When Good Fortune Arises. So the book is about this point. When you come in touch with a devotee, then you engage in devotional service. That's when your good fortune arises, because it is that service you do, willingly, unwilling, that hearing, the chanting, whatever it is, cleaning a pot, whatever it is, that's what gives you the accumulation of those activities, bring you to the point where you become, one day you said, this is what I want to do. I want to do this. I want to be with devotees. I don't like being with non-devotees. I want to just be with devotees. I just want to serve Krishna. I want to hear about Krishna. It accumulates. And then, from that point, then one begins to become more serious and wants to take up the practices of bhakti. So it begins through association, by which we get to engage in devotional service even unknowingly. And that underscores the importance of engaging in devotional service. Underscores the importance for ourselves, and also the importance of engaging others in devotional service. So that's where we left off. That's a summary of some of the major points. Now, another question comes up, which begins today's class. In this discussion of how someone becomes a devotee, then Babaji, Raghunath Das Babaji, who's speaking here, he explained the process of devotional service. I just explained a few stages where you engage in devotional service, and then from that you develop some faith in the practice and the process, and because of that you want to be with devotees, and because of that you do devotional service. And so it's called bhajana kriya. You become serious about devotional service, and when one becomes serious, then they want to connect with the spiritual master and take initiation. From doing bhajana kriya, then that bhajana kriya means doing the practices of bhakti. It also means taking initiation, and even if you don't take initiation, it means being serious about the practices. And from that, the next stage is anartha nivritti. And anartha is a Sanskrit word. Artha means of value, and anartha means without value. So anartha and nivritti means to end. So from doing bhakti, the things which are not of value to us, kam, lobh, krodh, moha, matsara, envy, anger, lust, and so forth, these things become diminished or completely absolved. And so now, because Babaji has explained that, the next question that Brajanath is asking at this point is about anarthas. And so I may not read everything, because it may be a little technical. I may skip around a little bit. It does get, Krishna conscious philosophy does get a little technical sometimes. So, Brajanath is asking, how many types of anarthas does a jiva have? And Babaji says there are 4 types of anarthas. Swarup Brahma, being an illusion about one's spiritual identity. Asat Trishna, thirst for temporary material enjoyment. Aparad, offenses, and Hridaya Dorbalam, weakness of heart. I'll read those again. There are 4 types of anarthas. Swarup Brahma, being an illusion about one's spiritual identity, or we can say identifying with the body. One has no realization or even understanding of one's spiritual identity, that one is not the body. Asat Trishna, thirst for temporary material enjoyment, which we could translate as greed. Thirst for material enjoyment, it's an unsatiated thirst, so we commonly understand that as greed. Aparad, offenses, and offenses can be to the name, offenses can be to the deities, offenses can be to the devotees, and offenses can be to the Dham. So watch out. 4 ways you can make offenses. Generally, we say the most, what's the word? The offense which creates the most harm is offense to devotees. Offense to the Dham would mean doing sinful activities in the Dham. Offense to the deity may be irregularity in one's worship of the deity or improperly worshipping the deity. Being neglectful, some of the practices of deity worship. Offenses to the holy name, there are 10, and really, those of you who've taken my workshop on japa, that really what we understand is the main offense is not trying to not make the offense, not making the effort to avoid the offense is really the foundation of that offense. And so if we're trying to chant well, then we're not making offense. At least if we're making the effort, and if we're worshiping the deity properly, we're not making offense. If we honor the Dham, if we follow the Krishna conscious practices in the Dham, we're not making offense. If we're not, of course, offending the Dhamvasis. And then the last one is Vaishnava Aparad, which is more detrimental and more common. So that is considered. So now we know there's four. These four aparads are considered anarthas, and more importantly, the tendency to commit the offense is really what the anartha is all about. Because if there's no tendency, we won't commit it, or we're less likely to commit it. So really, what we're talking about is the tendency. That's the real problem. Because when it shows up, that means it's already manifest. So it's not going to show up, or it's less likely to show up. Or perhaps we can say it's unlikely to show up if there's no tendency there to commit an offense. And here we're talking about offense to a devotee because it's the most detrimental and sometimes the most difficult to avoid. I was just, Radhanath Swami gave a lecture in Mayapur a few days ago or last week. And the section of the Bhagavatam was about working together. And he was talking a little bit about fault finding. And if you think about it a little bit, you see that, of course, we all have this tendency to find fault. And it's a tendency that's deeply rooted in material consciousness, which is why it's so detrimental to our bhakti. Because the origin of it is so antithetical to the nature of bhakti, because the nature of bhakti, at least in relation to devotees, is that we should be servant, we should be humble. So he was making the point that it's really rooted in the lack of humility, because where there's humility, there's service, and where there's humility, even if something is wrong, we won't necessarily see it as wrong. I was reading, there's a book about the life of Gaur Govinda Maharaj, and what's interesting about this book, and I've just been reading it lately, is that Gaur Govinda Maharaj was born in the family of Vaishnavas, but not only that, a family of exalted Vaishnavas, in a lineage of exalted Vaishnavas. So he had, by the age of 7 or 8, he had already read Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and his family and his uncles, they were all great kirtaniers. So he, by the time he came to Krishna consciousness, he was probably more advanced. He came in like 73. He's probably was more advanced in spiritual life than anyone is in ISKCON is even today, when he first came. So it was a unique situation for ISKCON because nobody had come from that background, and especially it was on a very elevated level of Krishna consciousness. Actually, there's stories of him exhibiting what externally appeared to be diseases, and when advanced devotees were asked to analyze what happened, they said, it's not a disease, it's prema. and he's exhibiting ecstasy. So I was a very rare person, not only as a devotee, but rare, I don't want to say rare, I will say unique to ISKCON. And he very, very knowledgeable of Siddhanta, more knowledgeable than I believe than anyone else in ISKCON. And so there was a time in ISKCON where there was a lot of turmoil, specifically surrounding gurus that were not behaving well, at least to the vision of devotees, some devotees. And so Gaura Govinda Maharaj took his first tour of the West, I think about 1985, was the first time he ever left India. And when devotees would hear him give class, they would realize that he's a very experienced devotee on a unique level of Krishna consciousness, unique at least in ISKCON. So they would ask him questions. Well, we see that these devotees who are supposed to be very advanced, who've taken the position of guru, sometimes they're not acting properly. Can we instruct them? And he said, the etiquette is you never instruct a superior, and all you can do is you act properly yourself. You set the example. And he went on lecturing and said, no, you never, that is not the etiquette, it's not the attitude, it's not right that you instruct a superior even if they're wrong. And he went on explaining how this is the humility of a Vaishnava. So for the Western mind, it's a little difficult to accept because we'll say, but they're doing something wrong. And so managerially, it may be necessary to deal with it, perhaps through dealing with others who will deal with it. But he was making a general principle that's the humility of a Vaishnava. That even he sees something wrong, he's always in the mood of honoring and serving. That's difficult, and especially for the Western mind. No, you can't see. We're not broadcasting the video because often the connection is too slow, and then the audio breaks up when I broadcast the video, and I'm not that beautiful anyway, so. You can live without seeing me. Shruti Sagara. You can find a picture of me on the internet if you really want to see me and put it up there. So, so when you think about this particular anartha, what really we're dealing with is the very seed of envy or lack of humility is really the cause of this kind of aparad, offense to Vaishnavas. And both Radha-swami and Gaura Govinda Maharaj were making the point that fault finding is also grounded in this idea that I understand things. I understand things better than others. I'm smarter, or I'm perhaps more cultured. In some way I'm superior. It might be intellectually. It might be just based on my abilities. It might be culturally. It might be educationally. It might be financially, caste-wise, that I believe I'm superior. And because fault finding is always done from a superior position, that I know more or I'm better. It's because if you think you know less or you're worse, tendency to fault find, it will be reduced or actually perhaps not even there. And naturally the tendency to respect will be greater. So, okay, I'll repeat that. That Radha-swami and Gaura Govinda Maharaj were both saying that a Vaishnava is humble, and so that it's that humility which actually, maybe the proper word is not protect, but at least for this discussion, that protects one from fault finding. But I would say even further, that humility keeps one in a position where one naturally wouldn't fault find. Because when there's lack of humility, what I was saying is that then we feel inclined to find fault when we believe we're in a superior position. Either we understand a situation better than others, or we just generally think we have more qualifications, such as better education, or in general, my intelligence is more refined or greater. Perhaps I'm proud of something, a talent, a financial status, and certain abilities, education, whatever. So from that perspective, the inclination to fault find will be stronger, because then I feel, well, naturally I'm in a superior position, so therefore I see things, I see what's true, and because I see what's true, then I point it out. Now, the point that those Maharajas were making was that the humility of a Vaishnava doesn't put him in that position. So because he's not in that position, he doesn't see things that way. And it's like Sushma's saying, and I'm saying, this is very difficult. And it's very difficult, especially because we're in Kali Yuga. And Kali Yuga, as we know, is the age in which everyone fights. In fact, Prabhupada said, wherever you get two people together in one place, there's going to be disagreement. If you're alone, there's nobody to disagree with, although you could find somebody who's not around to disagree with. But Prabhupada specifically making the point that when you're together, he said disagreement is going to be there as soon as two people come together, because we're different people, we have different views. But when one is advanced in Krishna consciousness, then one doesn't feel oneself to be better. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said something which is also difficult, I believe, for the Western mind to accept. And many Indians today have a Western mind being influenced strongly by the West. And he said, even if you see a fault, it's fault finding to point it out. That's difficult. Of course, it depends what the fault is, because sometimes the fault is affecting other people in such a way that we need to point it out. That then becomes a service. Again, he's speaking in general, because the problem is when we find fault, we're affected by it, and it doesn't matter whether the fault is real or not. See, that's his point. In other words, you might think, well, it's not fault finding if the fault is real, if it's objectively real. It says, what happened? And now I'm faulting the person for doing that. But his point is that that's not Vaishnava. And also, if we take it logically, the logical conclusion is that we'll be negatively affected. If we have a fault-finding mentality. Now, if someone has done something wrong and you're generally interested in the welfare of that person and somehow helping them, or the welfare of people around that person, or the organization around that person, and want to help, and are approaching it from a humble attitude, which is free from fault-finding, then you're not going to be adversely affected because you're not being infected with a fault-finding mentality. But if the mentality is simply to find fault, and here, objectively, there is a fault, so you can lash out at the person, then you'll be affected. And then that becomes aparad on your part. And so what happens is the fault of another ends up becoming a cause of our own harm. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur once said that don't allow faults of others to misguide and delude you. So he was well aware of how we can become like a magnet attached to somebody else's faults. And then we become deluded by that, and we become misguided. And so he ended that statement by saying, well, he said a couple of things. He said, when others' faults misguide and delude you, what you should do is look at your own faults. Be self-aware. It's much more important for us to be aware of our own faults. So he said, examine yourself, scrutinize yourself, find faults in yourself. He said this many times in different ways. And then he said that the others' faults won't harm you unless you allow them to harm you. So you can actually see how often others' faults harm us, because we get absorbed in thinking about them and we become quite negative. it has a quite negative effect on us. So there's a nice story I'll tell you. I don't know if I've told this story. It's an interesting story. That this man was on a plane, and due to some technical difficulty, the plane couldn't take off for a couple hours. So people were quite upset, but he wasn't upset. Actually, he seemed quite positive. And so his passenger next to him said, "Why you seem so happy about this?" And he said, "Well, there's probably 3 reasons the flight's not taking off. There may be some technical difficulty with the airplane. There may be some difficulty with the pilot. Perhaps the pilot could not come and the replacement pilot is not qualified. Or there may be some difficulty with the weather." So he said, "I'm much happier to be on the ground than be in the air if this is the case," and this is likely the case. All right, that made sense. So then after another 2, 3, 4 hours, plane still hadn't taken off, and he was still positive. They said, "Why?" And he said, "I had a lot of work to do, and I have this meeting before I get there, and I wasn't fully prepared, and this has given me the opportunity to prepare. So this is actually good, because if I came there on time, I would have to meet them, and I would not be fully prepared." So he said, "This is fantastic. This is just fantastic that we've been stuck here for 6 hours. This is fantastic." And the person next to that was asking he said, he didn't buy into it. He said, this can't, he's making this up. So then he questioned him and he said, "Do you really feel like this?" He said, "No, I don't." He said, "But I realize that if I don't put myself in this mindset, I'm going to be in a very negative mindset, because I'm going to be completely frustrated with the airlines, or frustrated that the weather's not good, or frustrated by whatever it is that's holding us up. Maybe there's a traffic jam in the airport because the weather was bad yesterday. And I'll just become extremely negative, disgusted, upset." So he said, "I force myself to look at things in another way. So I've created this very positive energy field around myself. So I'm feeling very uplifted by this." So it's interesting, because as I'm saying, well, like Sushma's asking, what if our mind registers a fault, but we don't speak a word? What then? Then you go back to Godhead, Sushma. And if you want to stay in the material world, I'll give you some insights how to do it. Talk about other people's faults. If you want to talk about other people's faults, they won't give you a visa to Goloka. Only the persons who get the visas for Goloka are the ones who don't speak about others' faults. You see, the material world is the place where people speak about others' faults. So, if you speak about others' faults, you become fully qualified to remain here, because this is the place where it happens. And if this is what you want to do, you can't go there. It's not allowed there. They won't let you in. So those who speak about others' faults, this is where they stay. This is the language of the material world. We have to learn to speak the language of the spiritual world. The language of the spiritual world is glorifying the Vaishnavas. The language of the material world is finding fault with the Vaishnavas. If you speak the language of the material world, where do you stay? You stay in this world. So, as I said, it's difficult to understand this. It requires a complete alteration in our consciousness. So if we go back to that story, the point of the story that I was making is, okay, let's say objectively a person has done something wrong. But let's say, for the sake of this discussion, and I think this is probably true in most cases, there's nothing you can do about it. It's just what it is. You hear that some senior devotee, respected devotee, has just done something horrible, or actually has been doing something horrible for the last 20 years and hiding it. And now you find out, and it's so frustrating. How could he do that? This is so bad. This is so horrible. And you just feel like screaming and crying and punching a hole in your door, giving up Krishna consciousness, or leaving ISKCON. ISKCON allowed this. They didn't know, or they knew, they didn't do anything. Ah! I'm screaming and yelling, I can't take it anymore. What's the use? That could be one reaction. But for most of us, most likely, there's nothing we can do. Absolutely nothing. So now, meditating on that creates extreme amounts of negativity within your consciousness. And that negativity has obviously extremely detrimental effects on your consciousness. So what's the point? Unless you're in a position to do something, and unless you're willing to do something, and unless you know what to do and you can do it without making offense, what's the point of meditating on that? Absolutely nothing. I was just thinking today, I'm giving a short talk on forgiveness, two talks on forgiveness on Friday and Saturday to the Russian devotees. And it's not a full forgiveness seminar. And so I can't present everything, so I was thinking, how do I want to focus this talk? And one of the focuses of the talk, because I can't present the whole forgiveness process, is to focus it on the importance of having good relationships, both as a pragmatic consideration for us getting along better so we can help reach more people, and also as a personal consideration. So then I began considering my own life and the frustrations that I've gone through. So let me just relate a few, because misery loves company, but I want to show you the reality of the situation. I had spent most, with the exclusion of maybe 1 year from the time I joined ISKCON, no, with the exclusion of 2 years. I joined the end of 69 and beginning of 1970, I'd become a devotee. And I was in San Francisco and then Canada. So in 1972, I came back to California and spent all my time either in Los Angeles or San Diego. San Diego is 120 miles from Los Angeles, with the exception of a few weeks in Laguna Beach. Those were the temples that I was working in and helping to develop. So 72, so 9 years, I dedicated 9 years of my 11 years as a devotee to those two temples. And so those temples built up. You can build up a temple quite a lot in 10 years. So these temples, 1972, San Diego was 6 devotees. And by 1981, it was about 60 devotees. So it was quite built up, and it went from a little house to a nice temple in a nice neighborhood. So naturally, if you build something up, there's some if you build something up, you get attached. You feel, what's the word? I guess attached is a good word. What word am I looking for? It's your project. Your heart is into it. Your life. It's like raising a child. Building up a temple. It's just like raising a child. So think of this temple as a 10-year-old child, right? So in 1981, there were some difficulties that the movement was facing, and the GBC guru at that time of Los Angeles and San Diego was making some decisions which I strongly disagreed with, and that caused me a lot of pain, because I felt they were not in line with what Prabhupada wanted and not in line with our philosophy, and just I felt it was a material way of dealing with with a problem, and not a spiritual way. And I thought that by dealing with it this way, you may solve the problem, but you will create many other problems which might be worse than the problem you're trying to solve. And it hit a climax in a lecture he gave, and I don't want to explain what he said in the lecture, because I don't want to use any curse words, but not curse words, slang, but there are curse words also. And it just hit the point where I said, that's it, I'm leaving. I said to myself, I'm leaving your zone. I can't deal with this, you know. So I was married, my wife was there, my service was there, everything. I had the place that I worked on, one of the best temples in America. That's it, I'm leaving. I can't work there anymore. So because of his strategies, because of his preaching, because of how he was dealing with his disciples, which was not congruent with how I was dealing with disciples, it was totally out of alignment with my vision and what I had been developing. Because in many ways I was more intimate with his disciples than he was, because I was working with them, and the strategies I had, what I was teaching them, how I wanted them to see, he was just pulling the rug from under me. So it hit this point. I said, that's it, I'm out of here. And another one of my godbrothers was in South Africa developing the project there, and he invited me to come. So I said, okay. I told this GBC guru, I'm out of here. What you said is the icing on the cake. I can't deal with this. This is wrong. This is undermining everything I've been trying to do for the last few years in rectifying the situation and bringing more purity into the environment here. And I said, I'm leaving. I'm going. So because of his behavior, I had to leave a project that I worked on basically for 9 years and built up from, that I was the only one working on it, but when I first went there in 1972, I think there was only 6 of us in a small house. And now we had around 60 of us or 50 of us. We had many, many programs going on, and we had moved the temple to a large building, and it was actually a cutting-edge temple in America, dynamic. And so I had to leave that. So, that hurt. Okay, so I get to South Africa, right? Very interesting thing happened. I get to South Africa in 1981. The GBC guru at that time, right after I got there, practically immediately, was having trouble and having difficulty. Interesting. Huh? What transpired within the next year is that, anyway, it was found out that he had been breaking the regulative principles, but he was trying to rectify himself by taking shelter outside of ISKCON. And he actually, ISKCON said, you're a guru within ISKCON and you're taking shelter of somebody outside of ISKCON. It's not going to work. And he said, well, if you force me to give up my connection with this guru, I'll leave ISKCON. So he left ISKCON. And many, many of his disciples went with him. And I say many, I've said enough that the temple that I was in had to close. The temple that I was in Johannesburg, that I had worked on for a year building up. And so it was a similar situation. That I had built up this temple, even in 1 year. It was the #1 book distribution of small temples. We were making devotees. Practically they hadn't made devotees in yugas, and we were making devotees. God brothers were coming to join me. It was happening, where things were moving. It was like we had 2 cooking classes a week. We had programs at college. It was happening. We were in the nicest neighborhood in Johannesburg. We were in the Beverly Hills of Johannesburg. So many devotees left when he left that there weren't enough devotees to run all the projects in South Africa. So we actually had to close the temple that I worked on. And so a new GBC came to take over because this other GBC guru, he had gone. And now it was a mess. And all these people that had come, they were disoriented. It was a mess. And, their guru had gone, left ISKCON. Should I go with him? Should I stay? And later the guru ended up falling away from Krishna consciousness, but so many people who had gone with him never came back to ISKCON. So it was a very bad time. So that project, that was gone, And I actually internally vowed that I was going to spend the rest of my life in Johannesburg developing that project. I loved it there. I loved the people so much. I just wanted to stay there and preach. It was just, people were so sweet, so intelligent, so cultured. I just loved them. I just wanted to stay there and preach. And it was a challenge because all the preaching was to Indians, and no one was preaching to the white South Africans. So that was also a challenge. And they were starting to come. We had a temple just for the white South Africans. So I really liked it. I just loved it there. It was very easy to distribute books. People were respectful, intelligent. They would take books, they'd read them. So I had to go. So the GBC said, well, why don't you go to Mauritius? Because Mauritius is next to South Africa. And when Jayatirtha left, the president of Mauritius, he also left. He was a foreigner. He went back to America. So I said, okay, I'll go there. So I stayed there for a year. I helped develop things there. And then I went on and eventually came back to America. And that was 1983 I left, so 84, 85, 86. So I was back in America again, working in Los Angeles and working in San Diego. And the guru that was in Mauritius, he came to America to work on a project of book distribution, and I was helping him. So I was both in San Diego working there with that guru and working with this guru to develop a full set distribution program. And I had spent time in Italy with him, and so we had this whole program going. So he came back to America. We toured different temples, got them enthused about the program. And at the end of his tour, he flew off to what I thought was to visit somebody or a relative or something, and he never came back. He had left Krishna consciousness, just dropped that whole program. All the work we had done, just dropped it. And it so happened that actually he had broken the regulative principles prior to that and didn't feel qualified to go on. Shortly after that, another disaster happened. As if 3 disasters is not enough. We had 4 disasters. Well, this guru had left also, well, I could say 5 disasters, because whatever I had built up in Mauritius by 1983, it was a lot. I had done a lot, actually, and I had a lot, not that I did it alone, but there were other devotees helping me. So a lot of senior devotees came to Mauritius when I went there at the same time. So because of all of us were there together, we were able to do a lot in developing the preaching and training the devotees. So it was going well. That guru who left, that I just explained left, when he left Mauritius, that was devastating for Mauritius. So a lot of that work that I had done was undermined when he left. But another interesting thing happened around that same time, shortly after. The guru of guess what happened to the guru of San Diego and Los Angeles, the places that I had been. Now at this point, see, I'd come back in '83, so and so this was 1986. So that adds. So we're talking 14 years. I spent 14 years working on those 2 projects. Guess what he did? You'll never guess. Would anyone like to guess, just by chance, what you think might have happened to him? Yes, he left. You know the pictures of the that are ingrained in everyone's mind, the pictures of the Twin Towers? Well, that's my visual of what happened to those temples. It just came crashing down. So, Prabhu's, Mataji's, that's what I went through. Now, objectively, those people were at fault. No doubt about it. They made mistakes. And the ramifications were horrible. Not a subjective reality. It's an objective reality. Things crashed. Programs crashed. Temples crashed. So many devotees left San Diego Temple when this guru left. So many programs had to stop. Financially, we were devastated. So now, let me tell you what happened. Prabhu's and Mataji's. As you could imagine, many of the God brothers and God sisters, what to speak of the disciples, were extremely upset by any one of these 5 incidents that I just explained, which all took place in a devastating time of ISKCON between 1981 and 1986. Those were horrible years for ISKCON. Any one of those devastating problems each one was enough for me to become extremely negative. Yes? You agree? I could just dwell on what happened. I could dwell on the faults of the person. In fact, many people actually left Krishna consciousness because they're so disturbed, so disgusted. It's like, why go on? This is what ISKCON is. This is how everything turns out. And it's not, as I said, not only one time, 5 times. Okay, first time, tolerated, all right, whatever. Second time, 5 times. And I don't think my situation is unique. Many, many people went through this in many different areas. And not exactly what I went through, but other difficulties which were just as bad, just as devastating, just as negative, just as upsetting. So any one of those situations could have created, if I meditated on it and allowed myself to become negative, could have potentially created enough negativity within me that it would have hurt my bhakti or completely uprooted it, and I would not be engaged in Krishna consciousness today, or I would be engaged but very much aloof from ISKCON and very much in the mood of finding fault. So this is a common scenario that happens in our movement. Something negative happens, something objectively negative happens. So now we go back to the example of the guy in the airplane. How do we deal with it? Well, how I dealt with it, what I realized was that if I allow myself to become negative, it's going to be a disaster for me. It's going to make it extremely difficult for me to continue in my devotional service. I have every right to be negative. I have every right to offend this devotee. But from the perspective of what is Krishna consciousness, there's no such thing as having a right to find fault. So it wasn't so easy, and it wasn't that I just went into this humble response, but it was through an evolution of a few years that I realized that if I hold a grudge, if I remain negative, if I remain in the mood of fault finding, it's going to seriously disrupt my Krishna consciousness, and I won't be able to be of service to my spiritual master. So I realized that in spite of whatever is going on, I have to carve out my own service, and I have to learn how to remain positive and enthusiastic within my devotional service so that I can be of use and of service to my spiritual master. That realization was not only what I had, but many, many God brothers had that realization. It was I would say, a necessary realization to save our lives, to save our Krishna consciousness, because we were seeing that many other God brothers were not responding that way. They were responding with criticism, negativity, and the result was they were distancing themselves from ISKCON, which meant distancing themselves from other devotees. And anytime you would speak to such people, and this is not an exaggeration, there would always be something negative that they would talk about. Even if the discussion had some positive things. Oh, I just came back from here, it was really nice. It always would come back to this negative. So this negative was like pervading their consciousness. They couldn't overcome it. And it made me think of the story in the Chaitanya Charitamrita of Ramchandra Khan. But within this story of Ramchandra Khan was a statement by Prabhupada that was quite intriguing to me. And it was somewhat difficult to understand, but by living through these events, I understood what Prabhupada meant. He said that Ramchandra Puri was situated in criticism. And in the story from CC is that Ramchandra Puri would invite people, renunciates, to his home, and he'd force them to eat a lot, and then after they ate a lot, he would fault them. Directly fault them and fault them to others. You're a sannyasi, but you eat too much. So that was his nature. It's like he had to criticize. That was his lifeblood. And if he couldn't criticize, he'd create a situation, force them to commit a fault, and then criticize them. And there are many other stories about him, how he would criticize others. So then Prabhupada said he was situated in criticism. So I saw this with these devotees, how they couldn't stop criticizing. It was just not possible for them. And so then if we come back to what Radhanath Swami said and Gaur Govinda Maharaj said, is that the basis of overcoming fault finding is humility. And so then we could see that because situations were so difficult, and because devotees made such serious mistakes, it required an extreme amount of humility to be able to overlook those things, to be able to go forward in Krishna consciousness without becoming situated in this attitude where we're always looking at what's wrong. So it's just something we have to understand, that humility is at the basis of overcoming fault finding. And if you think about it, you'll see that appreciation is really antithetical to fault finding. So appreciation is the remedy. And you will see that if you're focused on people's faults, you're not going to be able to appreciate them. So because they're contrary emotions, they're contrary forms of consciousness, they're contrary forms of way, they're contrary forms of ways of seeing things. Because appreciation requires a particular way you look at things. So now, let us go back to these situations, right? So, the first situation I was in was with this guru and GBC in San Diego, and you may remember, as I said, in 1981 I left because I was fed up with him, disgusted with him. Now, the things that he said that disgusted me were said only because there were problems with the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust and he was in charge. There were problems, financial problems, because from about 1979 or 80, book distribution had started to diminish, because there were more problems were coming in the movement and there was a lack of enthusiasm. It's a whole history, but it was quite a serious decline. And it was related to internal problems within ISKCON. And he had dedicated his life to printing and distributing Prabhupada's books. That's the only reason he was alive. If he couldn't do that, he had no reason to be alive. So the things he said that were so upsetting to me were said solely for the purpose of maintaining and expanding book distribution. And it was in a crisis state where it was falling to the lowest levels in practically the history of ISKCON. Those levels that they were, it was falling to a fraction of the levels that they were in previous years. And he was extremely concerned. And so the appreciative attitude would have been to see where his heart was at, to see where he was coming from, and to appreciate all the service that he had done up to that point, and to appreciate how dedicated he was to maintaining Prabhupada's BBT and to maintaining and expanding book distribution and to solving the current problems that ISKCON was facing in book distribution. So that's another way of seeing the same situation, and maybe even going further to help him even with that strategy that I disagree with, acknowledging that for the time being perhaps that is the only strategy, perhaps that is the best strategy, or even just humbly saying, could we discuss this? I know where you're coming from, I appreciate it, could we discuss alternatives? I wasn't mature enough to do that, and I was not in the mood of appreciation enough to be able to do that. But I just wanted to make the point that, Sushma was really difficult. And it was, this is a good point. Sushma's saying it must have been difficult. Yeah, it was difficult, but in retrospect, it was difficult because I had the wrong consciousness. If I were in the mood of appreciation, then okay, let's take these other stories. Okay, this other devotee leaves ISKCON. We're in South Africa. It's the next year. And then my project falls apart. I could appreciate his struggles. I could appreciate the difficulties he was going through. I could sympathize with him. I could appreciate all the service he has done up to that point. Right? Even though it had affected me personally because my temple had to close, I could have responded with appreciation, or I could have responded with sympathy, that he must really be going through some difficult times. I feel sorry for him. And I could have responded that way to any of those other devotees who left Krishna consciousness. And my realization in retrospect, which it didn't really dawn on me till about 6-7 years ago, and because of my work with forgiveness, that my response could have been one of support. I could have said, I understand your situation. Is there anything I can do to help you? Or if you ever need anything, just let me know. So, did anyone else lose audio? Sundarup lost the audio. I want to check in first before I continue. Okay. So Sundarup, if you're in India, generally, those of you who are in India, sometimes you lose audio because you can't take the same bandwidth. Okay. So I realized in retrospect my attitude could have been much different. Now, so, objectively you can say, oh, Mahatma, it was natural that you're upset. It's natural you would find fault. Okay, it may be natural, but I would say natural in material consciousness, but not natural for Krishna consciousness. And I could have appreciated, and if I had appreciated, it would have had a much better effect on the person who fell, and it would have a totally opposite effect on my own consciousness. From all of this, I think we should, if I were to sum this up, so Sundarupa, I was saying that I didn't have to respond with fault-finding or upset to the situations. I could have responded with appreciation. I could have responded with appreciation. I mean, I had that choice. It was just a different... It's like, if you look at your consciousness as a vehicle, and you have choice of 4 directions you can go in. But in this case, we're talking about 2 directions, basically. But as the driver, you can choose what direction you want to go in. So oftentimes, perhaps we don't realize that we have those choices. But what my realization, or one of the foundational realizations I had from all of this, is that Prabhupada said, higher than saving anyone else is you have to save yourself. And my personal realization in saving myself is that I have to save myself. If I'm going to be a service to Prabhupada in helping Prabhupada's mission, which means to help other people become Krishna conscious, then I have to save myself first. It's always, and it's not selfish. It's me, because physician heal thyself. If the doctor is sick, he can't cure other people. So the healthier I am in Krishna consciousness, the more power I have to save or help or enlighten or encourage others. So that was very clear to me, that and how do I do that? It's clear to me because Prabhupada said it, but when you put 2 and 2 together, it becomes clear to anyone who thinks about it. So the next thing Prabhupada said, if you lose enthusiasm, everything is lost. And so then I realized, Sundarup, I'll get to your question in a minute. Then I realized, okay, the basis of Krishna consciousness is to remain enthusiastic. Where did that realization come from? Well, I saw how unenthusiastic, how easy it was to become discouraged by negativity, because it was happening to me, but even more so happening to other devotees. Not all, but some. And I saw that, and I saw what was happening to their spiritual life, and it wasn't good. So I realized, okay, we need to be enthusiastic, and therefore, in a situation which is difficult, or in a situation which would naturally cause one to lose enthusiasm, I would ask myself the question, how can I remain enthusiastic? And one of the answers that I came up was, and I think it may be different for everyone, but I had to see what positive contribution I could make in Prabhupada's mission and not be deterred by the negative. So kind of, not that the negative went away, but it wasn't my focus. My focus was, well, what can I do? And how can I be enthusiastic? So, of course, I could be enthusiastic by chanting well. I could be enthusiastic by associating with nice devotees. I could be enthusiastic by giving Krishna consciousness to others. So I would see that it was actually quite easy, even in spite of these negative situations, to be enthusiastic, because it was just a question of focus. What am I going to focus on? So I started to focus on what's my contribution? What can I do to serve Prabhupada in this situation? Now things changed. This guru left. The dynamics changed. So my position also changed. Other devotees left. So I had to look at it in a different way. There's a story that one GBC went to Europe, and when he got to Europe to take over the zone, things were really bad. I mean, really, really bad. The former GBC had created tremendous problems, and people were quite discouraged. Things had been getting worse and worse for years. And so he came in and he had a tactic. And it was very simple. He just went around telling everybody, things are getting better, definitely getting better. I can feel they're getting better. So what did he do? Things weren't getting any better, but he kept saying they were. He was changing the consciousness. He was changing the perception of everyone. So everybody started to think and see, yeah, things are getting better. But things weren't actually getting better, but their consciousness was getting better because of that positive reinforcement. And as a result, things got better. So that was basically my experience. It's kind of like how you choose to see things. And if we choose to allow negativity to get us down, it's disastrous. It can destroy our Krishna consciousness. As I said, even if it's true, even if you say, but this is true, this is how it is. So the other thing, as I was explaining before, even in those negative situations, can we approach it humbly? Can we be a force to encourage others? Can we be a positive force even in a negative situation? Can we appreciate the service that the one who made the mistake has done or is continuing to do? Can we appreciate the fact that they've dedicated their lives to Krishna consciousness? If you think about it, so many things about any one of us that we can appreciate, even if we do something wrong, even if we make mistakes. There's so many things about any one of us that we can appreciate. And it's also interesting to note that this guru who fell down, I was close, obviously, to many of his disciples. And to this day, many of his disciples say, even though he fell away, he gave me so much. I appreciate so much of what he gave me. What he's given me has built my Krishna consciousness in many, many ways, so I appreciate that. So that's a nice attitude. So they don't have a negative attitude. Now others had a very negative attitude. A lot of those others left Krishna consciousness. And one of the ways they left was by faulting their guru who fell. So it's interesting, so I think it's important that we don't objectively put two and two together and say, well, if A, B, and C happens, then the result is I will be weak in Krishna consciousness, or I will be negative, or I will lose my enthusiasm. None of those are true. They're only true if you make them true. But A, B, and C, and D can happen, which are all negative, but you could come out of it and go ahead more positively. Or like when we lost a lot of our gurus in ISKCON. So one of the things that it did for me is it sent me a message to say, Mahatma, you have to be more careful in your Krishna consciousness and don't make the mistakes that they made. And also, okay, Mahatma, you have to come up now because these people are gone, so someone has to replace them. So, in this way we could take it positively. There's always, as we say, the silver lining. So let's look at Sundarupa's question. I have two difficulties. If I look at my day job, I need to manage people. And I get into the habit of looking at these people issues and facilitate them. So I'm sort of getting into the habit and probably continue this habit in Krishna consciousness. Tomorrow I'm giving class. Actually, I just wrote an article yesterday. I don't know, Sundarup, maybe you should email me and we can talk more about this. and I can send you what I've written. It's not an article, it's a chapter in a book. I'm writing a book on, which is called Corporate Sadhu, on taking Krishna conscious principles and applying them to the corporate situation. And this chapter was on appreciation. And so I use Prabhupada as an example. I use Krishna consciousness as an example. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that we all make in making the effort to appreciate, if we're even making the effort to appreciate, that's even another question. Are we making the effort? But let's say that we are making the effort, and Sundarup, you can see if this relates to you. And we are making the effort to appreciate. That oftentimes in trying to appreciate someone, we can't find anything to appreciate. Because they're doing things wrong, or they're not doing things the way we would do them, or the way we told them, or they're creating problems, or they're not straightforward, or whatever it is. But what we have to understand is that appreciation isn't, at least from the spiritual perspective, appreciation goes much deeper. Just like we don't eat meat. Why? Because we respect all forms of life. So you can say, we appreciate even the dog, the hog. We appreciate the fish. You don't, but of course you might say, but I don't really, appreciate fish. I don't go to the ocean and think, wow, the fish are so appreciable. But in a sense, you do appreciate them because you appreciate them enough not to eat them. You appreciate that Krishna has created them, that they have a right to live. They have some sense of feeling. They experience pain and pleasure. So there's some appreciation. So in spiritual life, there's a fundamental appreciation of what? That this is a spiritual being, part of Krishna, and Krishna's within their heart. And I respect them. I respect this person as Krishna's son or daughter, as Krishna's part and parcel, and I respect them as a temple of God. So just because they're a living entity, I respect them. And then if you look at the person that way, you will see the energy, the enthusiasm, the creativity, the sense of humor, whatever it is that comes from them is all a reflection of Krishna. So you can actually appreciate Krishna through people. Not that I would recommend watching sports or watching a comedian or watching movies, but whenever you're in touch with great talent, if you're Krishna conscious, you'll see, wow, this person, what he does is amazing. This is Krishna's talent. Or that person's so funny, and Krishna is funny, and his sense of humor is coming from Krishna. And this person is so intelligent or so creative or is such a good musician, and that's all coming from Krishna. So you can appreciate the creativity, the intelligence, the talents of another person because it's Krishna, because Krishna is giving it to them. I don't know if I told you this story. It's a funny story. Swami Vivekananda of the Ramakrishna Mission, who is not very popular in ISKCON because he believes that he is Rama and Krishna. But aside from that, it's an interesting story about him. He was in debate with an eminent atheistic scholar, and the atheist scholar was making fantastically logical and intellectual arguments for atheism. And at the end, Vivekananda said, thank you, that was I'm so inspired, I'm so enthused. You're so intelligent, you're so logical, so powerful, so lucid. He said, I could see God speaking through you in these arguments. And then the atheist was completely baffled. What could he say? So if you can see God coming through an atheist, certainly you can see God coming through your workers. Now, I want to say something else. Or Sushma, but even if every devotee isn't good, you see them as good, even if you don't see them as good. That's the point. Yeah. So, now I want to say something else, and I don't know if everybody understands this. Okay, well, let's see what Sundarup says. I've started to appreciate and talk on positives to get over this. It is working better, but still a long way to go. Sundarup, your company should hire me. And I'll tell you two things that they should pay me dearly for, because I don't think people understand these two things well. And I think one of them they don't understand at all. I'll save the one they don't understand. They may not understand at all for last. The first thing is research. What's the research? No, your company should hire me because I'm good. I can help them. Yeah, Intel should hire me. What city are you in? I need Intel on my resume also because I'm doing this corporate work. I'll even come for free. They can pay me if they like me. Here's the research. Nobody, yes, Bangalore, I forgot, yeah. Nobody in any company that you work in that's working for you gives their full creativity, gives their full energy. Yeah, we'll have to arrange a program. Probably when I get back in October or something. I'll have my website up and everything, the advertising, marketing. And maybe my book will be finished by then, which would be really good. So what the research shows is that nobody performs their fullest in any company. And so they thought, well, the reason that people may not be giving their fullest is because they have anxiety about their financial security, because a lot of people are not paid enough. And so this underlying anxiety about financial security and the future is a very negative force in their life. So they figure, okay, if we pay them more, that anxiety will go away. And so because that anxiety is not there, then the full productivity, this full dedication, creativity, everything will be there. They'll just give themselves. So they did that. And you know what happened? Same problem. They didn't give themselves fully. So money didn't do it. Salary didn't do it. So what did they do in this experiment? But those same people, they started appreciating them, acknowledging them for what they did, acknowledging them for who they are, acknowledging them for showing up every day, for being there, thanking them for their dedication, however they wanted to appreciate. What happened? That's when the dedication, the creativity, and so forth, that's when it all went up. What money couldn't do, appreciation did. So appreciation, why did it do that? Because it's the strongest need. Money is not the strongest need. Appreciation is the strongest need. Everybody needs it. So Prabhupada did it a lot. He was expert at it. Now, Sundarup, here's why your company needs me. Because if somebody else comes in, they're going to maybe tell you the same thing. But here's the point, which only you will know now, because you've heard from Mahatma. Appreciation is not done with your head. And this is where we all get messed up. You don't do it with your head. Appreciation is an emotion. Emotions are felt. Just like if I say, Sundarup, I love you. It will not communicate at all unless I feel it. Right? I say, Sundarup, I have so much affection for you. It will only communicate if you feel within my heart, you feel what's coming from my heart, and therefore coming from the tone, my mannerisms, my gestures, and so forth, that it's actually true. And then when I say it, it affects your heart. So the problem is that if we explain to people that you should appreciate others, what often will happen is you'll just do it because it's pragmatic. You say, well, if I appreciate it, there'll be more productivity, maybe I'll even get a raise, our department will be doing better. So you look at it just as a pragmatic principle. Now in ISKCON, they have what's called appreciation dinners for donors of projects or yearly donors or whatever. The problem is that a organization within ISKCON had to explain to the leaders in ISKCON that you need to do this. That's the problem. They shouldn't have had to explain that. The leaders should have just done that because of their appreciation for the service of these other devotees. So they have this appreciation dinner, but they're doing it because they were told to do it. Now, they may be genuine, they may agree, but in many cases it may be not so genuine because they're doing it because they were told to do it and or because it works. If you appreciate your donors, they'll give again. So, if you understand appreciation as an emotion, that's something you feel when you're in the presence of another person. You appreciate, not because you need reasons in your head, because the reasons are in your heart. This is like when you see a devotee, I appreciate you. Why? Because you've dedicated your life to Prabhupada. You've dedicated your life to ISKCON, or some part of your life, or something. Like there's so many devotees in Mayapur. If you come to Mayapur and you see the devotees here, wouldn't you appreciate the fact that they could be anywhere in the world, and right now they're living in Mayapur, or they're visiting for the festival, they're going on parikrama, it's really hot, they're going out all day, they're getting up, they're going to a temple, there's 2,000 people, you can hardly walk in the temple, it's sweaty hot in there, and they're all there. Isn't that something to appreciate? You know? So, in the same way, how do you feel from the heart? You have to feel it. And so, just the fact that these people, at your job, they come to work every day, they show up, they're there, they have enough integrity and enough self-discipline and determination to be at a job, to support their families, to be responsible. They show up, they're there. And you know that whatever they're doing, especially what they're doing well, Krishna is giving intelligence, you appreciate. So you can look for things to appreciate, but when it comes time to appreciate, it's coming from the heart. It has to be something you feel. If you feel, in other words, so you're looking and say, okay, this person, he's come every day to work for the last 256 days. He hasn't missed a day, he comes on time. And you just appreciate that in your heart, not in your head. You see it in your head, but you appreciate it in your heart. If you appreciate it and you just say, I just was thinking and I just want to acknowledge that you're always on time, you always show up, you never call sick, or rarely you call sick, and I see how hard you work, and I just wanted you to know that I really, from my heart, appreciate that. Now, if you do appreciate it and you say it, yes, they're going to feel it. If you do that, appreciate and say it enough, in a genuine way, very few people are going to leave your department or company. Why would they want to work anywhere else? Because they're not going to get that kind of appreciation. If it's artificial, people won't. It's not going to work. But yeah, right, whatever. So my point to you, Sundarupa, of course, to everybody, is you have to feel it. Can I just appreciate somebody for being alive, for being a person, for being a human being, for just showing up, for still chanting Hare Krishna, showing up at work, being a mother? You say, like Sundarup, you have women working in your company who are mothers. You can tell them, I just want to let you know, I appreciate, I'm aware of the sacrifices you make because you're a mother, the sacrifices you make by working for our company, sacrifices your family makes. I just want you to know I really appreciate that, and I know it can be difficult for you, and something like that. What do you think is going to happen with people like that you appreciate? It's going to be amazing, right? If you actually appreciate it. So if you just think about it, what are all these things you could appreciate about somebody? And then you bring it from your head now into your heart, so you feel it, then you can communicate it, and it will communicate, and it will touch people's hearts. This is why Intel needs to hire Mahatma, because he knows things that are very subtle on the level of consciousness, which the other trainers don't know. And that's our marketing approach. We change the consciousness. If you want to get people, everyone in your organization, to appreciate, you can't do it on a level of, okay, this is what we're doing, here's a new plan, everyone, make sure you appreciate 3 people a week, for at least 30 seconds. All right, great, It'll do something, but after a while, it's like, yeah. This is artificial. But if you take it to the level of consciousness where you actually do it because you feel it, then it's going to change everything. And that's what is needed within ISKCON, and it's needed within every temple. In fact, we need to have an appreciation festival where we all go around and appreciate one another. Yeah. So, you can tell Intel that Mahatma means one who's very rare and he's hard to get. And say, and tell him, I don't know if he'll even come to Intel because he's way above Intel, but he might if we beg him. And I don't know if we can pay him enough, but he might do it anyway. So you can tell him that, right? But wait till the website's up so they can see it's on its way. So Sushma says, you had told me to appreciate and believe it made my life much easier with my family. Yeah, it's transformational. Not only Sundarup and Sushma, as Sushma said, it's not only transformational for the people you appreciate, it's transformational for you, the appreciator. That's the value of it. Probably more transformational for you. And but it has to be genuine. And then what'll be good for you, Sundarup, is if you do that with people of the office, it'll be easier for you to do it with devotees, because there's more to appreciate about devotees in general. I do this a lot in my own life. As this question comes up a lot about that often devotees say, sometimes I see better qualities in non-devotees than I see in devotees. How do I deal with that? And Bhagavatam says, well, those are not really good qualities. They're just, they're materialists and they don't have any good qualities. But if you actually see a good quality, maybe the problem is that the good quality, it's not used for Krishna, so we call it a bad quality. Just like you could see a nice house, but the house is not used for Krishna. So although it's a nice house, it's not really a nice house, because it's just used for one's personal enjoyment, or a car, or anything. So it's not nice in that sense. But if you isolate the house and say, well, objectively speaking, the house is nice, the use is not nice. So objectively speaking, say, well, this person has self-discipline. I see that they're very good at disciplining their lives. Their desk is very organized. They have a good work ethic. So you can see that. So you can appreciate that. And by appreciating that, what you're doing is you're appreciating that you would like, if for example, that's something you're lacking, you would like to be that way more in your life. So the appreciation of them, of the quality they have, actually helps you. Not only consciousness-wise, but it helps you practically. So Sundarup's going to experiment with this, and then when he transforms his whole department, he's going to tell them, I learned this from the corporate sadhu, Mahatma Das. And if we're lucky, he might come and teach this to all of us. If we're lucky, if we beg him, and we pay him enough, because he's a Mahatma, he's very rare. Hare Krishna. It's all marketing. Sometimes you can't be humble when you market. What can I say? They say, when do you want to market yourself? Ruthless self-promotion, of course. We're devotees, so we're not so ruthless, and we try to be humble. But we do have something valuable to offer. So now, it is 7 o'clock my time in India. I've chanted 3 rounds since we started at 5:30 my time this morning, so I must bid you all goodbye, as we say in India. I beg, what do we say? I beg your leave. I beg to take your leave. Sundarupa, thank you. So now that Sundarupa is eternally indebted to me, I'll get him to pay back the debt by getting me into Intel. And then once we get into Intel, then we can get into all the Intels in India. And we'll tell Intel what they need to be told. And Intel will take off all over the world, and they'll all realize it was due to Mahatma that we succeeded. A humble Hare Krishna devotee has gone into the corporate world and helped them succeed. Wow, isn't that amazing? Who would have ever thought of that? He's got no MBA. He doesn't even know how to do business. He can hardly count his own money. He doesn't even know how much money he has in the bank, but he's helped Intel become fabulously rich by one principle, by teaching them how to genuinely appreciate. Isn't that amazing? And he learned it all from his spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada. Thank you all. We will see you on Saturday. Yes. I leave for South Africa Sunday, and when in South Africa, it's going to be another story. We will keep you posted as to the classes. And thank you all for coming. And appreciate some people genuinely this week and see how it changes them in your life. Hare Krishna.